Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is the Eruvin Daf Lamed Aleph. We're at the last line of Daf Lamed Amud Beis. And the Gemara discussed for us a case where a Eruv Tchumen, was placed inside a cemetery for the sake of a Kohen. Tanna Kama holds that's not a proper Eruv because he has no access to that food on Shabbos. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda maintain that's a valid Eruv because he can get in there somehow. How's he going to get into the Beis HaKvaros? The Gemara told us he can use a Shida, Teva, Migdal, either a closed carriage, a large chest, a large closet, which creates that oil, that insulated entity, which protects him from the Tumah. So Rabbi Yehuda maintains even this type of oil is considered a proper oil. Oil is Zorik, Shmei oil, a portable oil, is reckoned with. Whereas the Tanna Kama maintains an oil Zorik, means an oil that can be thrown around. A portable oil is not considered a proper oil and can't create that insulated entity to protect him, to insulate it from the Tumah. Therefore, this Eruv in the Beis HaKvaros is inaccessible to the Kohen. Therefore, it's invalid. Continues the Gemara. What about a case where the Eruv was placed on top of a single caver? This grave wasn't in a Beis HaKvaros, it was just a single grave. Says the Gemara on the last line of Lamed Amud Beis. V'ha de Sanya. So what about the following brayso? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ma'arvin l'kohen tar, b'truma tahir b'kever. One can place an eruv for a kohen tahir using truma tahira. Now certainly chulin is allowed, but the chiddush here is even truma, which if it becomes tamei, it's inedible. Even this type of eruv can be placed for this kohen tahir b'kever on a single grave. Says the Gemara, Hechi Azel. So how is the Kohen going to get in there to access his Eruv? B'shida teva migdal, for instance, employing this carriage, this chest, meaning, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no problem, because even in a Beis HaKvaros full of graves, he can get in there and access his Eruv through a closed carriage, etc. Certainly in this case, when it's only a single grave, he just gets close to the grave, and he has no concern about getting tummy. Says the Gemara, V'akiva da achsa, itamila. Okay, so we address the Kohen. It's a single grave, he just walks over close to the grave, he doesn't get tummy. But what about the Eruv itself? We're speaking about Truma, which can't become tummy. Once he placed the Eruv on the caver, the Truma becomes tummy. So the Truma itself is inedible. Says the Gemara, we're speaking that the fruit was not Huchshel Kabal Tumah. It never got wet with the one of these 7 qualifying beverages, water, dew, etc., which is a requirement to enable something to become tamei. So this fruit never got wet with one of these shiva mashkim, and therefore cannot become tamei even when it's placed on the cave. Oi, sheniloi peris. Let's say we're speaking about a baked good, so it was something which was needed using fruit juice, apple juice, orange juice, which are not one of the qualifying beverages which enable something, make something susceptible to tumah. So the kohen is safe, the truma is safe, but how's he going to actually get the truma off the caver without becoming tamei? Says more, how's he going to retrieve the eruv? He uses a simple, like a pole, a piece of wood which is not a utensil, not a kli, which do not contract tumah. So if he uses this type of pole, he can just retrieve his Eruv. He's not going to get tamei because he's not going to touch the caver. The truma itself, as we said, is not enabled for tumah, and he's going to use a pole to retrieve the Eruv. So he has full access to it. Says the Gemara, if he uses this pole, then fine, the pole itself is not a kli, it won't become tamei, but it will serve as a oil, as a roof. If it's a wide pole, it will transfer tumah of the caver over to the kohen underneath the piece of wood. Says more the that he tilts the pole on its narrow side, meaning that we don't have a sizable pole, a wide piece of wood which is actually serving as a roof. It's only the narrow side which is facing down towards the caver. Therefore, there's no oil whatsoever. There's no roofed area which will transfer a tumah from the caver to the kohen. So that explains Rabbi Yehuda's shita that allows placing the Eruv Tchumen, on the kaver for the sake of the kohen. The kohen is safe, the truma is safe, and he'll retrieve it safely. Says the Gemara, Ihachi. If you have it all worked out, if that's the case, my time of the Rabbanon. So why does the Rabbanon hold that you cannot place the Eruv on the kaver? You've addressed all our concerns. It's fully accessible. Says the Gemara, because Sabra they hold, fine, he won't get tummy, the Eruv is fine, everything is safe. There's another concern. Because Sabra they hold, also liknis bayis, b'yisuarno. One is not allowed to establish a home, acquire a bayis, a dwelling, a residence, using something which is asur b'hana, something from which a person cannot derive any personal benefit or pleasure. Let's take a look at Rashi inside. So where the Rashi lines get wide, it will be 6 lines right before that, beginning with the words Ihachi my time of the Rabbanon. Says Rashi, if that's the case, my time of the Rabbanon, bekever yechidi. When speaking about a single grave, what's the problem? So you understand why the Rabbanon disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a Beis HaKvaros. Because it's full of graves, and there's no way to get in there. They have a chatzitza. They don't hold that this type of chest or closet will present a chatzitza, ba'oil zar, because it's using a portable oil, according to the Chacham, doesn't create this insulated entity and protects them. Therefore, when it comes to Beis HaKvaros, they disagree. We understand, granted. But in this case, where it's a single kever, what's the problem? The kohen could simply position himself near the kever and retrieve his eruv. So what is the reason why the Rabbanan invalidate this eruv? Says the Gemara, also liknos bayis b'surano. The kever, one is not allowed to establish his home, his dwelling, using something which is asur b'hana. A kever is asur b'hana. V'hahanoi. Establishing an eruv tchumen is pleasure. It's hana, it's benefit. The mishteri beile meifa kutzal tchum, because the eruv enables him to go out past the tchum, so he has personal benefit from it, and he cannot have any hana from the mace. Not only is the mace itself asur b'hana, even those that serve the mace. For instance, the grave of the mace is also b'hana. The nafkal Sanhedrin, we learn it from the Gzera Shava, Mivat Thomas Sham Miriam, the Garmar Sham Sham Egla Rufa. So you employ the Gzera Shava, it says by Miriam, Thomas Sham Miriam, the word Sham is connected to the word Sham, which is cited by Egla Rufa, just as Egla Rufa is asur b'hana, likewise a mace is asur b'hana. Says Rashi, Vafilu b'Yisrael nami asur Rabbanan. Now, if this is the reason why the Rabbanan disallow this type of eruv, then it has nothing to do with the kohen. This applies even to an ordinary Yisrael. He cannot place his eruv by the kaver, which is asur b'hana. V'ha tani kohen. Why then does a brisa cite specifically kohen, implying that the concern is because of the kohen? Says Rashi, no. This concern applies equally to the Yisrael as to the kohen. The reason why the brisa discusses kohen to teach us the extent of Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that even a kohen can have his eruv placed there, as we discussed earlier, because we address all the other concerns properly. There's no concern of tumah, not on account of the kohen, not on account of the truma, as the Gemara discusses for us. But truly, the concept here is merely based on the fact that the eruv is on a makom which is asur b'hana, and that's why the Chachamim don't allow this eruv. Continues the Gemara. If so, Mechlal Rabbi Yehuda Savar. If so, Rabbi Yehuda holds mutar. One is allowed to have hana. One is allowed to place his eruv on something which is asur b'hana. How is that? This is halacha agreed upon by all. Says the Gemara, because Savar Rabbi Yehuda holds mitzvahs lav lahanis nitnu. Mitzvahs were not given for hana, meaning the kinyan shvisa of eruv is a mitzvah. That's not called personal benefit, personal pleasure. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda allows it to be placed on the cave. Let's take a look at Rashi, explains this. 10 lines from the bottom of the Amud. This is going to be the next Rashi, the following Rashi after the one we just saw. So Rashi says, mitzvah is lav lahanis nitnu. Ve'ema arvin elo ledvar mitzvah. Why is an eruv called a mitzvah? Because the Chacham only allowed the eruv to be established for the sake of mitzvah. L'lechos l'beis ha'avel. Or the Beis HaMishra could come on. As Gemara will tell us later, it's only allowed for the sake of going to a mourner's home or a Beis HaMishra wedding. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, if it's a mitzvah, you can place it on the kaver. That's not called hana. Mitzvah is lav lahanis nitnu. Continues the Gemara. So if that's Rabbi Yehuda's reason, so apparently the Chacham disagree with that. They hold that you can't place the Erev there because, although it's a mitzvah, you can't derive Hana. Is that so? If so, this statement that Rava stated that mitzvah is lav lahanis nitnu, shall we say it's dependent on this machlokes Tanoim? Rava is only compatible with Rabbi Yehuda, because the Chacham seem to hold that a mitzvah is called Hana, and that's why you can't place it on the kaver. So it's a kasha on Rava. Rava will respond, no. All hold that mitzvah is lav lahanis nitnu. A mitzvah is not considered personal benefit, personal pleasure. Amalach Rava. Isvir lahu or isvir alan. If we hold that the ein ma'arvin al mitzvah, indeed, that the erev can only be done for the sake of mitzvah, in this case all would agree that this erev is perfectly fine. To kuli alma mitzvah is lav lahanis nitnu. All would agree that you can place the erev on the kaver because mitzvah is not called hana. However, in this case, the machlokes is based on this very question. Ma savar ein ma'arvin el dvar mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda holds an erev can only be established for the sake of mitzvah. Therefore, he holds no concern placing it on a kaver. It's not called hana. Umar savar. However, the chachamim hold ma'arvin afilu dvar rishus. They disagree regarding this very concept. They hold you can make an erev even for arbitrary reasons, for personal reasons. Therefore, placing an erev tumen on a kaver is considered personal hana. Therefore, it's us. Continues the Gemara. If so, meaning if the Chachamim hold that an erev can be done l'dvar rishus, if so, had Amar Rav Yosef. What Rav Yosef told us, ein ma'arvin el dvar mitzvah, that erev can only be done for mitzvah. Shall we say that statement is in question? It depends on machlokes Tanoim. The Rabbanan disagree with that. Amalach Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef will respond, no. Dekuli alma ein ma'arvin el dvar mitzvah. All will agree to this concept that erev could only be done for the sake of mitzvah. Or dekuli alma, all will agree as well. Mitzvah is lav lahanis nitnu. And mitzvah is not considered personal hana. So both premises are accepted upon all. Rav Yehuda and the Rabban both hold, number one, an erev is a mitzvah because it's only done for the sake of mitzvah. A mitzvah is not hana. So what then is the point of this agreement regarding placing the erev on the kaver? The following is a machlokes. Mar savar, Rav Yehuda holds kivan de kana le erev. Once the erev is kaina, once the erev has taken effect, has been established, he has no reason. He really couldn't care less if this food disappears. He doesn't need to safeguard his food. He wants the erev to be chal, to be established, to be implemented, and that's it. So all he has is really the mitzvah. Therefore, it can be placed on the kaver. Umar savar. However, the Rabbanan hold nichale de mintra. He'd like the food to be safeguarded, to be kept in place. Why? The itzruch achale, because perhaps he'll need it throughout Shabbos, and he wants it to be there. And if he needs it, he should have access and be able to eat that food. Therefore, the Rabbanan hold, although the actual establishing of the erev, of the residential, the Makam Shvisa, the Shabbos residence, is considered a dvar mitzvah, not personal hana and personal pleasure, and really is mutter. But there's another concern. Perhaps after the erev takes effect, he still wants it to remain in place. He wants it to stay on the kaver. So he's making use of the kaver for personal use, for personal interest. He wants it to remain there so he can access and eat it on Shabbos. Therefore, the Chacham hold one cannot place an erev on the kaver. So in summary, Reader maintains an erev on a kaver is okay. Rabbanan say it's not okay. And the reason, according to the conclusion of the Gemara, is so we're speaking even about a kohen and even about truma. The Gemara explained the kohen can get in there no problem, either in a chest or, as Rashi explained, it's a single kaver, so he just stands nearby without getting tummy. The truma itself won't become tummy because it was never hushal kabel tumah. How's he going to retrieve the erev? Using a stick. So what then is the machlokes? The Gemara concludes all agree that an erev can only be established for the sake of a mitzvah purpose, to go visit an avel, to go join a wedding. And a mitzvah is not considered hana, personal pleasure. That's agreed upon by all. Rabbi Yehuda maintains, if so, there's no concern placing the erev on the kaver, because it's strictly for the sake of mitzvah. Rabbanan maintain fine. The actual acquisition of the Shabbos residence is a mitzvah. But what about the fact that he would like the Erev to linger on, to remain in place? So he can perhaps access it on Shabbos. That's personal pleasure and gain. And therefore, he cannot place the Erev on the kever, which is also bano. Continues the Mishnah. We're going to have a list of various food items which are technically edible and therefore can be used for the Erev. And the Mishnah will conclude with another couple of items which are not halachically permissible and therefore cannot be used for the Erev. Now each one of these cases will entail some type of chiddush, some type of novelty, as the Gemara will explain for us. It says the Mishnah, Ma'arvim b'dmai, one can make the Erev using dmai, the produce purchased from Amoritz, which has some sort of uncertainty as to its status, whether or not the Amoritz separated to Ramaisis properly. Now, we learn elsewhere that really, because Roiv Ami Oretz Ma'asrin, most of the Ami Oretz do take this seriously and do address the obligations properly, but Midirabbanah, there's a chumrah that one is meant to go ahead and remove some additional Torah Meiser from the Dmai. So the Dmai, which had not been addressed rabbinically, can be used for the Erev. But Dmai, B'Meiser Rishon Shalosh Tumasai, a person can use the Meiser Rishon, which is the portion given to the Levi, whose Truma was already separated. So what happens is the Meiser Rishon is given to the Levi, and then he separates a tenth of that, which is called Trumas Maser, gives it over to the Kohen. So once this Meiser Rishon has been properly addressed, it can be eaten and can be used for the Erev. Ube Maser Sheni v'Hegdesh Shenivdu. Or he can use Maser Sheni or Hegdesh, something which was given to the Beis HaMikdash, Shenivdu, whose Kedusha was transferred onto money. V'Kahanim b'Chala, they can use the Chala portion of the dough, which is mutter for them. Aval loy betevel, but certainly one cannot use proper tevel, which had not yet been addressed properly with the Trumas and Maasros. V'loy b'Maser Rishon shelo neto Trumasai, nor can he use the portion of the Levi, whose Truma was not yet separated and given to the Kohen. V'loy b'Maser Sheni v'Hegdesh shelo niftu, which were not redeemed. Continues the Gemara. Demai, how can the Mishnah say Demai is useful for the Erev? Halei chazilei. It's not suitable. He can't eat it. Now Tosfos points out right here that the Gemara's kasha is strictly on the sheet of Sumchus, who says that the food of the Erev needs to be suitable, at least in theory, for the person who's establishing the Erev. Whereas according to Beis Hillel, there's no concern here. They say that the Yisrael can use Truma for the Erev, because although he himself can access this food, he can't eat it. But it's suitable, it's chazi la'achrim, it's suitable for others. Therefore, it's already considered mazain, it has a prominence in chashivas, and can be established as a residence for the dira. But the Gemara is according to Sumchus, who requires that this individual who's placing the Erev, he personally should have access, and heter, it should be chazulei, for the food of the Erev should be accessible to him, and be edible to him. Says the Gemara, D'mai is le chazulei. How could he eat the D'mai? Says more, there is a way, theoretically, that this person himself is allowed to eat D'mai. Why? Because we know that the whole concept of D'mai is a chumrah, and the Chachamim applied a kula for the aniyim. A pauper is collecting his food, etc. This poor person is allowed to eat D'mai. Says more, based on that concept, really any person, theoretically, can eat D'mai. He becomes a poor person. Says more, migu, the boy mafkiluhu l'nichsei. Because theoretically, since he has the ability to make his nechasim hefker, so once he renders all his possessions ownerless, he becomes v'haba, he becomes a poor person. And this D'mai is perfectly suitable for him. So since he has that theoretical option, hashtanami chazile. Therefore, in the present time and moment, we also consider this thing edible, technically edible for him, and therefore he can place it for his erev. This non-is we learned machil and sanin D'mai. We can feed the poor people D'mai. Ves achsanya D'mai, and also the achsanya takes. Let's take a look at Rashi up on the top line. The achsanya says Rashi chayolois malchei Yisrael, the Jewish soldiers, shematil and oisen al bnei ir lezunan, who the members of the community have to support them. V'avlu kaniyim. So these soldiers are classified as poor people. Shara einam b'ateim, they're not home, and they're dependent on handouts. Therefore, they can be fed D'mai as well. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna. Tana, we learned Beis Shammai Ayrim ein machilon es aniyim D'mai. Beis Shammai disagree. They hold they cannot feed even aniyim D'mai. But loim machilon es aniyim D'mai. Yes, you can feed aniyim D'mai. And our Mishnah follows Beis Hillel. So Dmai is suitable for the Ani. That explains why any person can use Dmai for his Erev. Because in theory at least, the Dmai is suitable for him if he decides to become an Ani. And according to Simchas, that theoretical permissibility is sufficient, as we learned earlier regarding the wine for the Nazir. Right? Simchas agrees that since theoretically speaking he can remove that Nazir status from himself, which will make him mutter b'yayin, therefore he can use the wine for his Erev. Here as well, since theoretically he can work his way to the Dmai, it's suitable for the Erev. Continues the Gemara. So the second item on the list was Maserishan, which was given to the Levi, who already separated the Trumas Maser, which was his obligation, to give to the Kohen, and that can be used for the Erev. There's more Pshita, of course. It's perfectly permissible food. Why would I think it can't be used for the Erev? You fulfilled all your obligations. Says Molei Tzricha, apparently we're speaking a case Shekdima b'Shibbolin, that the Levi preceded the Kohen, and he came along when it was still in its stalk form. Let's take a look at Rashi explains this for us. The second line from the top. Shekdima b'Shibbolin. So just for a second outside, we have this crop. We have the stalks which were threshed, and we extracted the grain. We made a kri. Kri is the pile, smoothed out the kri. That's considered to be fully developed grain. It's called dagan. Dagan is chayiv and trumas hamaisrus. So the first thing on the list is truma gedola, which is given to the kohen. The second on the list is meiser rishon. A tenth of the remaining grain is given to the Levi. The Levi in turn takes his meiser rishon and separates a fraction of that, a tenth of that, gives it to the kohen. It's called trumas maser. So it's the separation of the maser. Now what happened was here, the Levi outsmarted the kohen. He came running when the grain was still in its stalk form, which was still prior to the onset of any obligation of Trumas HaMaisrus. Because the chiv is only, the onset of the chiv is only when it's considered dagan grain, which has been threshed, piled up, and smoothed out. Let's take a look at Rashi. Shekdimu b'Shibbolin, so the Levi outsmarted the kohen. He came running when it was still in its stalk form, the Truma Gedola, meaning he was Magdan Truma Gedola. He came before the Truma Gedola was taken care of. The Minat Torah, HaTruma Kademas Lamasa, because Minat Torah there's a very specific sequence to the removal of Trumas HaMaisrus. First comes Truma. Truma Gedola is number one. Why? The Reishis Korachmana. Torah regards Truma Gedola as Reishis, the first one. Umanam Meiser, Noisen Maser, Rishon Levi. After removing the Truma Gedola, the second step is a tenth of the remaining grain goes to the Levi. That's Meiser Rishon. And the Levi in turn takes a tenth of his portion, the Trumas Meiser, gives it to the Kohen. V'achshav Herem HaLevi v'kadmai. The Levi hurried up and he preceded the Kohen. Why? So he should get a larger portion. Kadei shleich sirenu Kohen echad minun b'maser. Because if the Kohen would get his portion first, he'll get his 50th, let's say, echad minun, for the Truma Gedola, that's going to lessen the quantity of the remaining grain, resulting in the Levi receiving a smaller portion. If a Levi preceded the Kohen, he came running, he came to take his Meiser Rishon before the Kohen will take his Truma Gedola. So that's the case. The Levi got his Meiser Rishon, and then went ahead, and of course fulfilled his obligation by removing the tenth of his Meiser Rishon, and Trumas Meiser given it to the Kohen. But let's remember the Truma Gedola was never removed from the portion of the Levi, because he received his portion prior to the owner having removed the Truma Gedola from the entire kri, the entire grain pile. So that's the situation here. Says the Gemara, Pshita, again, isn't this evident? If all obligations were fulfilled, that this is mutter. The Gemara actually was a unique case. Like Tzricha was speaking Shekdima b'Shibbolin. The Levi was Magdim, the Kohen. He came before the Kohen and he took his portion when it was still in grain form, in stalk form. Certainly the Trumas Meiser was removed from the portion of the Levi. He fulfilled his obligation. But the Truma Gedola, which was meant to be taken off first, was never addressed from the portion of the Levi, because he came before the Kohen. The Chiddush of the Mishnah is that even this type of Meiser Rishon is mutar b'achila, because since he outsmarted the Kohen, and he took his portion when it was still in stalk form, prior to the onset of any obligations. The pasuk teaches us, we learn this from Midrasha, that the portion of the Levi going forward is exempt from Truma G'dayla, and therefore it can be used for the Erev. That's the Chiddush of the Mishnah. Explains the Gemara. The Ravo Amar Shlokish, as he taught us, named Rav Shlokish. The Amar Ravo Amar Shlokish. Maserishin sheikdima b'shibalim. So if it was taken when it was still in stock form, patur Truma G'dayla. It's exempt from Truma G'dayla. Shenamar. V'arim oisem imenu. This is the pasuk speaking about the portion of the Levi, the Maserishin. You're meant to remove from it Trumas Hashem, Maser. That's the Trumas Maser, the 10th of the Maserishin, goes to the Kohen. Maser, Mina Maser. So the extra words here, Maser Mina Maser, it's coming to teach us, Maser Mina Maser Matiloch. I've obligated you to separate a 10th of your Maserishin. But that's it. V'loi Truma G'dayla, u Trumas Maser Mina Maser. This is speaking to the Levi. You have no chiv to make two separations. Aside from Trumas Maser, also Truma G'dayla, there's no chiv to do that. Why? Because you've received your portion at the point in time when the grain was not yet obligated in Truma G'dayla. Let's remember, he took it when it was still in stock form. So although he outsmarted the Kohen, and actually it resulted in some loss to the Kohen, the Torah tells us that his Maserishin is exempt from Truma G'dayla. And that's the case of the Mishnah. If that's the case, that you exempt the Levi's portion from Truma G'dayla, so why strictly when he took it in stock form? Even if the Levi came running before the Kohen when it was already bikri, it was already in grain form. Kri is the pile of grain. So the grain was extracted from the stalks, it was formed into a pile, smoothed out, which is considered to be Gemar Malacha. The completion of the process. Right now, it has the status of a grain, and all the chiyuv, the obligations apply. So perhaps even in this case, if the Levi comes running, gets his portion, runs with it, perhaps even now, that chelik will yipat from Truma G'dayla. Amalei Sabai responded, on this exact case that you're suggesting, the Torah specifically says, no, the Levi must address both obligations now. Mikol Maser Seichem or Mikol Matne Seichem, depending on the gears of Mikol Matne Seichem. In that case, we're speaking about the Trumas Maser. Mikol Maser Seichem Torim is called Trumas Hashem. The pasuk is coming to add something. You must remove as kol Trumas Hashem, all the Truma of Hashem. So the word kol is coming to include something. That in this specific case, the Levi can't simply get away by just addressing Trumas Maser, separating a 10th of his Maserishin. No, he must address the Truma G'dayla obligation as well. He must make two Trumas. As kol Trumas Hashem. And therefore, he must also separate the Truma G'dayla. Says Marois, how do you know that this pasuk here, which is obligating him to remove the Truma G'dayla, speaking about a case where he received his portion when it was already dogan, it was already grain form, and the previous pasuk which exempts him is speaking about the stalk form. How do you know? It says more very simple. Hi idgan. In this case where he received the Maserishin, when it was already a kri, it was already a pile, idgan, it was already considered grain. In which case there's already a chiyuv of Truma G'dayla here. So once the obligation of Truma G'dayla is here, he can't whittle out of it. He can't be exempt from Truma G'dayla, which has already been applied. So the Levi must go ahead and address both obligations, Trumas Meiser and Truma G'dayla. V'hayla idgan, as opposed to the previous case, where he received it when it was in the stalk form, was not yet dogan. It had not yet been formed into grain. So at the point in time when the Levi received his portion, there was no chiv of Truma G'dayla yet. So it's logical to say that the pasuk, we have two psukim, right? One pasuk obligates, one pasuk exempts. It's logical to say that the pasuk that exempts the Levi from his Truma G'dayla, speaking about a case where he received his portion prior to the onset of the chiv Truma G'dayla. And Torah is telling you, once you received it, you're exempt from Truma G'dayla, and all you need is to remove the Trumas Meiser. So in conclusion, our mission is speaking about this type of case, where the Levi took his portion when it was still in stalk form, and Truma G'dayla was never removed from the Levi's portion. Nevertheless, it's mutter, as we learn from this pasuk, and therefore can be used for the Eruv Tchum. Continues the Gemara of Maser Sheni v'Hegdish Nivdu. One can use Maser Sheni, or the Hegdish, which are already redeemed. Pshita, of course. If the pidyon took place, why would I think it's not suitable? A tzrich apparently was speaking about a case shenosan sakeren, where the owner put forth the principal amount, the principal money, but didn't add the fifth, which is a chiyuv. If the owner redeems his Maseches Eruvin, his hegdish, he has to add another fifth, a fifth of the total value. So although he didn't add that fifth, which is a chiyuv, he can still go ahead and consume this produce. The mission here is teaching us although there's a chiyuv for the chaimish, but it's not ma'akiv, it doesn't invalidate the pidyon, and therefore this food is suitable. But you cannot use pure tevel, which is produce where the tumor of ma'aser was not yet removed. There's more pshita, of course. If it's asur ba'achila, it can be used for the erev. Apparently we're speaking about a unique type of tevel. But tevel with rabban. We're speaking on a rabbinic tevel. How's that? For instance, he planted in a otters, a flower pot, she'ein nakav, an unperforated flower pot, had no hole, so it's completely detached from the ground. So minatura, this produce that grows within this entity is not obligated. There's no chiyuv of tumas or maasros. It's only the rabbanon. The Mishnah is teaching us even tevel, which is classified as tevel midrabbanon, is asur b'achila, and therefore it cannot be used for the erev. So the Gemara here is assuming the Maseches Eruvin here is pure Maseches Eruvin, where the Trumas Meiser was not yet separated, and therefore it's asur b'achila. Pshita, of course. Why would I think this can be used for the erev? Says the Gemara, and this relates to the earlier discussion. Apparently, we're speaking about the Maseches Eruvin, whose Trumas Meiser was separated, but you know what wasn't separated? The Truma Gedola. Because we're speaking about a case where the Levi received his portion prior to the Kohen receiving his Truma Gedola from the entire crop. But the problem was that he didn't come when it was in stalk form. He came a bit later, when it was already in grain form, when the chiyuv of Truma Gedola had already applied to the grain. Now he took his portion prior to the owner separating that Truma Gedola to the Kohen. So Levi took his portion, took it home. Of course, he separated the Trumas Maser, the 10th of his portion, but he didn't address the Truma Gedola. The message is teaching us that this is asur b'achila and cannot be used for the erev. So apparently we're speaking about a case the Levi preceded the Kohen, but was already kri, was already in grain form. So the Trumas Maser was separated from the Maseches Eruvin. The Levi addressed that obligation, but he didn't address the other obligation. But Truma Gedola was never removed from the Maseches Eruvin, and therefore it's asur. Now the tema, perhaps I would think, that Allah follows Rav Papa's challenge. Rav Papa asked Abaye, perhaps even in this case, it should be mutter, and the pasuk, meaning the pasuk that exempts, should apply to this case specifically, and not to the other case of the stalks. Kamash malon kedushanile. So the Mishnah here is informing us, no, that Allah follows Abaye's response, that the pasuk, which obligates the Levi to separate not only Trumas Maser, the 10th of his portion, but also the Truma Gedola, which was disregarded and ignored. That pasuk is addressing a case where the Levi received his portion once the grain has already been developed, and the chiyuv of Truma Gedola was already applicable. Therefore, the Levi can exempt himself from that chiyuv, and unless he separates Truma Gedola, this food is inedible and therefore cannot be used for the erev. Which were not redeemed. Pshita, of course. If there was no pidyon, it's asur. Like Tzricha, apparently we're speaking about a case. Shapadan, he did redeem them, but he didn't do it properly. Padan kidel kilchasa. For instance, Maser kigoin shepdoi al gabe asiman. For instance, when he was paid the Maseches Eruvin, he used an asiman. Asiman is a unminted coin, which is not suitable for the pidyon of Maseches Eruvin. Shepdoi al gabe asiman. V'rachmana amar v'tzarta kesef. When describing the money on which the Maseches Eruvin was transferred, the Torah uses the word v'tzarta. The Gemara makes a drasha. It needs to be kesef sheishel v'tzura, which has a properly minted form on it. So although this fellow did pidyon, but since he didn't do it properly, he didn't do it on a kesef sheishel v'tzura, this food is inedible, it's asur b'achila, outside Yerushalayim, of course, and cannot be used for the Eruv. Continues the Gemara. What is the example of the Hegdish, where the Pidyon did take place but not properly? Says the Gemara, Kigon Shechilaloi Al Gav Karka. He used land to transfer the Kedusha of the Hegdish on. The Rachmana Amar V'Nasna Kesef V'Kamle. The Torah, when describing the money which was used for the transfer of the Kedusha of Hegdish, discusses Kesef. Specifically cites money, indicating that only money can be used to be Machal the Hegdish. But if he goes ahead and is Machalid on land, then the Pidyon does not work. Now, of course, we're not speaking about specifically money. Taisus brings that there's a limud. You can use other types of articles, even Shava Kesef, all types of articles which have value. But on Karka itself, the Pidyon cannot take place, and apparently that's the case in our Mishnah, that the Pidyon of the Maseches took place improperly. Likewise, the Pidyon of the Hegdish, and therefore they're unsuitable, their asabachila cannot be used for the Eruv. Continues the Gemara. So this individual would like to establish his Eruv Tchumen. He's going to use an emissary, he's going to send his food out to the Eruv site using a cherish, a deaf, mute, shoita, deranged person, or a katan. Is that okay? Hashalech eruva biyad cherish shoita v'katan, oy biyad misheina moide be'eruv. Or he sends it with an individual who doesn't really agree with the concept of the Eruv. He doesn't live according to the principles of the Eruv. The Gemara will explain who that is. So he's unreliable. Eino Eruv, all these individuals are unreliable and cannot use them to establish the Eruv. So either it's because it's unreliable, or, as Rashi will explain, that the Eruv Tchumen requires a person who has the ability to make the kinyan, as we'll see in the Gemara. What if he asked his friend, he instructed somebody to wait out there and to receive the Eruv from these individuals and to set it down in its place? Then certainly it's a valid Eruv. Says the Gemara, the katan, like the Mishnah tells us, he can't send his Eruv in the hands of a cherish, a shaita, or a katan. Why is a katan unsuitable for Eruv? V'amar Rav Huna, katan goyves Eruv. Rav Huna says that a katan can make his rounds amongst the neighbors of the courtyard, collecting the food, to establish the Eruv Chatzeris, to establish that joint ownership, joint usage area of the Chatzer. So apparently a katan can make an Eruv. So why does our Mishnah not allow the use of a katan to establish the Eruv Tchumen? Says like Kasha, the teretz is depending on what type of Eruv we're speaking. Kam Eruv Tchumen, our Mishnah is discussing Eruv Tchumen, where a katan is not capable of establishing an Eruv Tchumen. Kam Eruv Chatzeris. Rav Huna was specifically speaking about Eruv Chatzeris, where a katan has the ability to collect the Eruv Chatzeris. Why the difference between the two? Let's take a look at Rashi inside. So 18 lines from the bottom. So it's the first Rashi of the Gemara. Goyba Eruv. This is Rav Huna speaking that the katan can go collect the Eruv mibnei Chatzer u'ma'erev aleim. He can collect the food from the neighbors of the Chatzer and establish the Eruv Chatzeris. So why does our Mishnah not allow the katan to do the Eruv Tchumen? Says the Eruv Chatzeris is different. The Eruv Rishusayu ba'almu. It's simply a merging of the ownership, of the usage of all the members of this Chatzer. That happens on its own. Meaning, once you collect that food, you've collected their dira, their dwelling, their ownership, their use. The fact that the food is already sitting together, that itself creates that Eruv. It's not the katan doing it. It happens on its own. That automatically merges their usage of this Chatzer. Because it's like they have one dira, one dwelling. Although generally a katan doesn't have the halachic ability to perform a masa, to make a kinyan, we're not concerned. Why? Because it's not like, come on, as we learned later. Let's say, for instance, there's one homeowner who has an ongoing partnership with his neighbors. So they all have a partnership with wine, let's say. Say food partnership. There's no need to make an Eruv because they're they're already merged together. They have that joint ownership of that food. So we see from there that you don't need to make a specific, a special masa, an act of kinyan, of acquisition for the Erev Chatzeres. As long as they're somewhat merged, they come together, they have a shutfus in food, so their rishus is automatically merged together. So the fact that this cotton goes around collecting the food, that in itself creates the Erev. It's not the cotton who's accomplishing it, it's the food sitting together which accomplishes the Erev. So that's regarding Erev Chatzeres. That's why the cotton can do it. Aval Erev Tchumen, Aknu Yishvisu. Erev Tchumen is different. It's an acquisition, it's a kinyan of a place of residence. You're creating a Shabbos residence out in the field. The cotton li'olam l'mikli. A cotton doesn't have that ability, doesn't have the power to acquire, to make a kinyan, to create that Shabbos residence for the sake of the fellow who's sending the Erev with him. So that's the difference. When it comes to Erev Chatzeres, the cotton is suitable, whereas Erev Tchumen, which requires a kinyan shvisa, the Mishnah tells us you cannot use a chereshet of a cotton unless there's somebody waiting for him who will take the Erev and establish it in its right place. Continues the Gemara. Oy biyad mishe'enim ha'erev, mishe'enim moida be'erev. Nor can you send the Erev Tchumen, handing it to somebody who doesn't agree with this concept of the Erev. Man, who are we speaking about? Now the Gemara is assuming we're not speaking about a goy. Of course, a goy cannot serve as a shliach, can't be an emissary for the Erev. Apparently we're speaking about a yid. So explains Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz. That's the Gemara's kasha. Who are we speaking about? Rav Chizah Kusai. We're speaking about a kusi. So this was the group of fellows who were Megayer and their conversion was questionable. So some mitzvahs they would keep diligently, but others they would disregard, including the mitzvah of Erev. Therefore, he's unreliable. You can't send the Erev with him. You don't know if he's going to put it down, or perhaps he doesn't have the ability to make the kinyan shvisa because he doesn't practice Erev. Continues the Gemara. But if there's somebody waiting out there, he instructed somebody to receive the Erev from the chereshet of a cotton, then it works. Says the Gemara, V'leichush dilma le'mamtile. Why don't we have a concern that perhaps this cotton will never get to that place? How do you know he's even going to bring it to that fellow? Fine, you have somebody waiting for him, but how do you know the cotton is going to bring it? As Rav Chizah told us elsewhere, this is upcoming in the Gemara, that we're speaking about the person who was standing and watching. Hachanami here as well, apparently it was ba'omed v're'eu. The person standing was standing and watching, and he sees that the cotton is heading in the right direction. It appears from Rashi, that's all that's necessary. As soon as he sees him heading in the right direction, he can assume he's going to arrive at the proper location and meet the other person. Says the Gemara, okay, so you know he's heading there, and you know there's somebody standing and waiting. But there's another concern. Perhaps that person, although he told him he's going to do his Erev for him, how do you know he's going to keep his word? Maybe he's not going to take the Erev and establish it. As Rav Chil told us elsewhere, there's a chazak, there's a halachic presumption that an emissary performs his shlichus. He keeps his word. He committed, he'll do it. Hachanami here as well, chazaka, shliach, there's a chazaka, we can safely assume that this shliach, who is asked to receive the Erev and place it in its proper place, will indeed keep his word and establish the Erev. V'heiche itmar to Rav Chizah v'chil. So we just quoted Rav Chil, we just quoted Rav Chizah. Where did they state their statement? On which halacha? Aha, itmar. It was stated on the following halacha: the sanya nasei lepil v'hilichai. So the person gave the Erev to his elephant. Rashi says it was a trained elephant. V'hilichai. And he started taking it to the Erev site. L'kaif v'hilichai. He gave it to his trained monkey to go take it to the Erev site. Ein zeh Erev. So it's not a valid Erev. Why? So for one of two reasons. Either this animal doesn't have the ability to create a Mokum Shvisa Shabbos residence for this fellow, or because they're unreliable. We don't know if they'll ever get to that location. However, but if he instructed somebody to stand there and receive it, it's a proper Erev. The kasha is, fine, there's somebody waiting for them, but perhaps they're never going to reach their location. Apparently, we're speaking where he's standing and watching, and he sees an animal heading in the right direction. Okay, the animal will get there, but perhaps the person is going to change his mind. He's not going to accept the Erev and establish it. That a shliach will indeed keep his word and perform the shlichus that he had committed to doing. So this is where Rabbi Chiya and Chizah stated their opinions, stated their interpretation, and the Gemara applies the same concept to our Mishnah, that he could send the Erev with for instance, a katan, provided that somebody waiting for him was speaking that he's watching the katan as he heads in the right direction. In addition, there's no concern that the person waiting will change his mind and won't keep his word. Rather, we employ the chazaka of shliach, since he accepted this job, he committed himself to establish the Erev. We assume he'll keep his word and establish the Erev properly. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. The Gemara began by telling us about a machlokes between Rav Yehuda and the Rabbanan, whether one may place an Erev on a single kever. Rav Yehuda says yes, Rabbanan say no. The Gemara concluded that all seem to agree that establishing an Erev Tchumen is considered a mitzvah, because we can only do the Erev Tchumen for the sake of a mitzvah, to go be Menachem Oval, to participate in a wedding. And a mitzvah is not considered personal hana. Mitzvah is lav l'hana isn't, as Rabbi tells us. Rabbi is speaking about blowing a shofar. So one can blow a shofar even if it's from a carbon, where generally a person cannot derive a personal hana, but a mitzvah is not considered personal hana. Mitzvah is lav l'hana isn't. So all agree to these two premises. The machlokes is, Rabbi Yehuda holds that placement of the Erev is a strict mitzvah. Therefore, there's no concern placing it on the kever. The fact that he's a kohen, there's no concern. He'll stand right next to the kever. He won't touch the kever. The fact that it's truma, we're speaking about truma that can't become tummy. It never got wet. How is he going to retrieve the Erev? He'll use a pole, which is a pshute klietz, which will not be kabel tumah. A thin pole, which will not drag over the tumah of the mace to the kohen. So we addressed all our concerns. Rabbanan disagree. They hold placement of an Erev on a kever is also, because although the actual kinyan shvisa is a mitzvah, but there's some personal interest here as well, because he'd like the food to remain in place, just in case he needs it on Shabbos. He'll be able to go there, access, and eat it. So therefore, there's some personal gain and benefit here. There's hana here, and therefore he cannot place the Erev on the kever for the sake of Eruvei Tchum. We had a Mishnah in the Gemara which gave us a whole list of different types of scenarios, some foods which are mutter for the Erev, some foods which are asur. The Gemara explained that each one contains a chiddush. And we concluded with the Mishnah that one cannot send his Erev Tchumen out to the field using a cherish, a shaita, a cotton, a kusi, or as the Gemara added, an elephant or a monkey, who are trained to do so. But if there's somebody out there who will accept the Erev and place it in the right location, then that's okay, provided he's standing and watching, and he's seeing that the elephant or the monkey are heading in the right direction. Then we can assume that they arrived there safely, in addition to the fact that there's a chazaka, that the shliach, meaning that fellow waiting out there, is oiseh shlichusa, he's going to fulfill his commitment and accept the Erev and place it properly.